get started. Thank you guys so much for joining us. We know that the 9 a.m. slot, at first we're like, this is great. Then we realized, oh shit, they gave us the 9 a.m. slot. So thank you for all who are kicking your morning off with us. We know you probably had a late Lisbon night, but we are really excited to be here today to talk about the traditional art world, meeting the crypto world, what our journeys have been like in that space. And hopefully we can shed some light on this idea of the bridge we're all trying to build between these universes. So by way of introduction, my name is Colleen Cash. I'm the Vice President of Auctions at Artnet. I run their marketplace business, the transactional things that we do in that space. And I'm really delighted to be here with an esteemed panel this morning. I'm happy to introduce Greg Harder, who is from MakersPlace. Greg is a product manager at MakersPlace and was previously a startup founder in the sustainable textile industry. He has a 2-year-old husky and loves to hike. Hi, Greg. Good morning. Next, we have Nadia Tyga, who is the executive and curatorial director of Snark.art. Prior to joining Snark.art in 2019, Nadia operated as an international exhibition producer, consultant, and curator. Her experience includes 10 years of project management of collateral events at the Venice Biennale and nationally recognized museum exhibitions and large-scale public art projects. She also has worked as an art consultant and a dealer with collectors globally and has worked with over 300 artists from distinct countries. Nadia has a 4-year-old pit bull. She's an EDM lover and a runner. Welcome, Nadia. And finally, I'm happy to introduce Joe Kennedy, who's the co-founder of Unit London, which was a gallery founded in 2013 out of a desire to disrupt the traditional gallery model, support the world's most exciting artists while making work accessible to the widest possible audience. In 2018, Unit London opened their 6,000 square foot gallery on Hanover Square in the heart of Mayfair in London. In 2021, Joe co-founded Institut, the first art world-led platform for NFTs. The inaugural exhibition, NFTism, No Fear in Trying, curated by Kenny Schachter, who is one of our in-house columnists at Artnet as well, so small world there, covered more than 100 artists, convened them working at the cutting edge of the NFT field. Since then, Institut has positioned itself as at the intersection of art and technology, aiming to combine curation and art historical relevance with the core tenets of the Web3 space. Joe, welcome. And I think that's sort of a perfect place for us to kick off, this idea of the intersection between the traditional, the metaverse, Web3, and like many industries, I mean, we're seeing them all at this conference, right? Sports, fashion, music, you name them, they're all grappling with this idea of how do we engage with Web3. And certainly for the art world, in the last, say, 16 months, it has been like the Wild West. And I think the industry has been both keen to embrace this space as a concept, as a reality, as an asset class, and as a new medium in sort of what we consider, oil paintings, pastels, and all of a sudden now you have NFTs as well. So I think what we might want to start about is what do we as an industry really mean when we talk about this idea of NFTs as a new medium? And how are we, the art world players, from the commercial entities to the curatorial entities, how are we actually evolving operationally, curatorially, to embrace the Web3 reality meaningfully? Nadia, maybe you want to kick us off.
Is it on, right? Hi everyone, it's a pleasure speaking here. Thank you, Colleen, for such a nice introduction, and I'm very honored to be in such a good company with great marketplaces and platforms. I like that you mentioned about the what is new medium and how we actually developed this, because Snark.art was created actually to experiment with blockchain as a new medium. So we offered the artists that never worked with glass or with blockchain before, with this technology, the possibility to explore it, its opportunities and limits as well. So yeah, the new medium, I would say probably now I don't see much experiments in all over the place. NFTs, some more like JPEGs or GIFs or videos. So, but blockchain actually gives much more opportunities for artists to use this technology. And in the beginning of, like in 2018 or 2017, there were some experiments and it was revolutionary, right? So we have, of course, like responsibility not just to bring the artwork to sell and to inspire new collectors to enter the space because the market is so hot and you can make money and you can speculate and like signify the speculative aspect of NFTs. But actually, as like be responsible for the art part and the actual artwork, I believe, are the ideas, as very famous, like Joseph Cassou said.
Totally.
So yeah, in this case, I think that to use blockchain technology as a medium is a key, and there is a question not how we use it, but why we use it.
Sure.
So and maybe later I will tell more about the projects, but this question is pretty important.
Totally. And Greg, maybe you can tell us a little bit about your work at MakersPlace. I mean, you guys are dropping things weekly, even sometimes daily. What is it like working with so many artists in this idea of NFT as a medium, generative art, using AI? I mean, what are you seeing sort of at that product level in terms of innovation and continuing to push the boundary on what an NFT is and what it can be?
Yeah, I think one of the coolest interactions that I've had so far from the very traditional world coming very digital was with Urs Fischer. So he has a series of 501 like 3D multi-form sculptures essentially, and it stays very in line with his medium traditionally, like sculptor, painter, but it just brings it to like a whole new level. And the fact that they're GLB files, it has unlockable content for collectors, which you can bring to Decentraland, bring to your own metaverse essentially, was like such a unique exploration of his career and concept, and yeah, working with him on that was super interesting. So I think just like the different layers that artists can add and explore underneath their work, as opposed to just one physical piece traditionally, and sometimes even paired with a physical piece initially, has been interesting for me to think about, from like how are we aiding the artist in presenting that digitally, and the actual product experience as a collector, like instead of coming in and being like immersed into this like beautiful room, if you could imagine, with sculptures and works on the wall, like how are we doing that for the artists digitally is the most fun and also challenging question at this point.
Totally. And now this question's for Joe. So, I come from the brick and mortar auction world. I used to literally work at the decorative arts department of Christie's. So real physical things with real life utility, so to speak. But our industry has often talked about this idea of being the bridge, right? The bridge between the two worlds. I know in some ways, I think we've all used that word too liberally, maybe. But Joe, I mean, you come from a traditional gallery background. You deal with clients now across sort of both shorelines, so to speak. What are we actually seeing in terms of conversion? It's funny, Artnet launched its first NFT sale in December 2021, and 100% of the buyers were brand new to Artnet, straight crypto guys. Second sale, we started to see the conversion. So what are you seeing as those aha moments, in terms of onboarding traditional clients into this space, and likewise vice versa? Do you have crypto clients buying physical art?
Yeah, it's interesting. Like when we launched Institut last year, we launched it in September, and the hypothesis was that, with Unit London, we built a gallery which has a client base which probably skews more towards a younger audience versus our peers in the gallery world. So, having a more open-minded, digitally savvy audience, we were like, well, we can be the platform that will onboard the traditional collectors into the NFT space. And what ended up happening was we launched our first drop with Kenny, and all of the buyers were people we'd never met before. They were all kind of like big NFT collectors from Twitter and from Discord. And so our eyes were open to this brand new audience. The interesting thing about the two audiences is that, the art world exists on much more slow-paced, more traditional communication platforms. Instagram is probably the biggest. And the Web3 world is obviously hyper fast-paced. It's on Discord, it's on Twitter, you blink and you'll miss it. And so they're not just kind of different audiences, they're also on different platforms. So they're in two sort of vacuums. And the big challenge is really, how do you reconcile those two audiences? How do you find a common denominator that brings them both together? What are the shared values? But in terms of conversion, we've now just sort of planted our flag really in the sort of the firm Web3 space. The core tenets of this space, like accessibility, transparency, community, and utility, I think, also within artworks. The ability for artists to build utility into work, as you know, the art world has always seen art as a sort of functionless thing that just sits on the wall. But now we're seeing artists explore blockchain technology and how they can use the tech itself as a medium to express themselves, which is super interesting. But really, it's a case of like, how do you educate the traditional collectors? How do you bring them in? But for us, really, it's like if we can focus on all the amazing things that Web3 is offering, like all those things I just mentioned, the idea of building community, the idea of utility, game theory even, you know, making art fun. And then also, you know, bring kind of the great work, the curatorial expertise and the network from the art world. I think if you combine those two things, you bring together the best of both worlds. I think that's like the really exciting intersection.
Right, and I'm curious, you know, operationally, because I think you're right. I mean, the art world, a traditional art transaction, it has a lot of overhead. It's expensive. I mean, the average buyer's premium is like 26% nowadays, right, in the secondary market auction world. Shipping is super expensive. So I think Web3 is a panacea in some ways for some of these traditional friction points that the industry has had. But what are you guys doing to both, you know, do you have on-ramps? Are we bidding in ETH? Are we closing these transactions on chain? Are we doing them off chain? Like, what has worked for you guys, and where else do we need to go as an industry to reduce whatever remaining friction points they have? An open question, whoever wants to take it away.
I can start. So we built Institut with a fiat on and off ramp, which was tough to build because there's like obviously the regulatory framework around fiat custody and NFT custody, crypto custody is tricky. But we've actually seen 90% of transactions happen in ETH. Especially the bigger transactions, we sell work. One NFTs up to $2.5 million on the platform, and they've been predominantly ETH transactions. I think that's actually more a nod to the people who are buying NFTs right now. Sure. It's not really the traditional collectors. For traditional collectors, I think the idea of digital ownership of assets is still something they don't quite understand. You know, whenever I speak to traditional collectors about, you know, the value of buying an emerging artist in the NFT space. It's always like, well, what do I do with it? Do I put it on the wall? Can it sit in my living room? And it's like, actually, it's not about that. It's about having it in your wallet. It's about being part of the community. It's the access that it gives you. So I think there's just a sort of a conceptual barrier that there's still to overcome. But yeah, I mean, I think the fiat on and off ramp is something that is maybe attractive and makes it slightly easier because for traditional like non-crypto people, the idea of a wallet is still like, oh, that's a big ask to download a wallet, have a seed phrase. Yeah. So the custodial system I think is still useful, but I think for all of us it's about how do we focus on making Web3 more aspirational to those guys, so that they actually want to download a wallet.
Sure. And I'm curious too, for those who work with artists and with creators, there's a lot of conversation now about sort of the multi-chain future. You know, I think the art world has been quick to embrace, you know, Ethereum-backed assets. Clearly, you know, at Artnet, we've sold counterparty-backed assets and some other chains as well. What chains are your artists liking? What, you know, are we seeing a shift towards other, you know, chains in this ever-evolving world? Greg, maybe you want to kick us off there.
Yeah, I mean, we operate solely on ETH still. We're exploring multi-chain right now. After the community has just been asking for a tremendous amount of time, especially on the artist side. You know, Tezos or Solana, I think, are our top secondary options. But yeah, from the artist side, gas fees can be detrimental. You know, we have artists from all over the world, from many countries where their currency compared to the dollar is, you know, it makes a simple gas fee a barrier to entry where, you know, we wouldn't necessarily think that about like a $25 to $50 minting fee, but if that's your first mint, you might not have that amount of funds just liquid sitting around. So, but I just wanted to add to your point earlier, in terms of conversion, artists are kind of where my mindset is. I more so work on our new user growth and, you know, your point about distribution. Yeah. I wanted to just add a nod to that. That's definitely been a big converting factor for someone who traditionally works physically, can now transpose their work digitally, and the nearly limitless distribution is a big one for physical artists coming to the digital world.
Totally.
Yeah, I would like
Go ahead,
to
Nadia.
I would like to add to this one, because when Snark.art was founded in 2018, actually our goal was to work with traditional artists and bring them into the crypto space. And we did several revolutionary projects, I think some of them will remain in history, like 89 Seconds Atomized by Yves Sussman, with like fractal digital artwork. But then we realized that it's not scalable enough, and as well it's challenging because you as a company spend a lot of time and efforts to create something very unique and interesting, revolutionary, but you even don't know if you are going to sell it. And like we did probably like 3-4 projects a year. Then when we build the platform, Snark platform, for like embracing and open our arms for more artists, again, our strategy was like, yeah, inspire traditional artists to explore blockchain. And yeah, it was great for many artists in like 2019, it's still revolutionary. Right. But for the collectors as well, it was, they started to buy slowly, but what I see that collectors from the crypto space, they probably much faster learn about art, what is like good aesthetic and what can remain in history, than traditional collectors entering the space, buying NFTs. So yeah, and speaking like before that, to build the community around the artwork, around the projects, about the platforms is a key for any platform here, and for the artists as well.
And it's so decidedly different than, I think, how we've all started in the industry, right? Which is, it's a very exclusive world. It's a rarefied world. I mean, galleries have programs you have to get into. You can't just necessarily walk into a gallery and say, okay, I have money in my pocket, I want that piece. I mean, these things get placed, right? I mean, they have market-making endeavors that they're trying to do, and it can be a very high barrier to entry. Likewise, in the auction space, intimidating. If you are not familiar with the Christie's and Sotheby's and Phillips and Bonhams of the world, you go in there, you're looking at the fee structure, you're like, this is crazy. How do I do this? I mean, they can be very intimidating things. And this idea of community in this blown open way is completely revolutionary for this industry, where private sales were done under the table. And really, I mean, it wasn't arguably until, let's say, 2014, when Jeff Koons' Balloon Dog sold at Christie's for, what, $159 million, that like contemporary art was in the press. It became this behemoth that we know it today, that I think we are now seeing sort of our industry's engagement with Web3 sort of stem off of. So to the point of community, and you know, again, I'm like a secondary market person. I'm used to dealing, frankly, with dead artists, right? I mean, all of these blue chip names that trade in the secondary market, we're talking estates here. We're not talking living, breathing, doing business with the creator. So how has that changed your work? What social media channels are you guys using? Have you changed even your staffing and your resources to sort of embrace the idea of community management and needing to be sort of finger on the pulse at all times? Joe, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, I mean, the community building aspect I find quite stressful, because it's like, you know, you have Discord and Twitter, which are just popping off like every second of the day.
I know, it's like you need to be on 24/7, 24/7.
So, but it's so important. And I think, you know, you've seen a lot of more traditional artists enter the space and just thinking that they can, you know, jump in and cash grab and make a great NFT project or work, and it's just going to be really successful because they've had success in the traditional world. It doesn't work like that. And I think because the community, because it's so community driven, if you're not like really participating in the community full time in a really authentic, genuine way, then the guys who are part of that community aren't going to buy the work, and they're not going to support the artists for future projects. So yeah, it's very different. Like the art world is incredibly hierarchical, centralized. You know, there's a very small group of curators, collectors, galleries, auction houses who determine taste. And then everybody else has to kind of, you know, get on board with that. And as you say, it's very difficult to gain access. Yeah. And, you know, the ethos of Web3 and the NFT space is decentralization. At the moment, probably, well, I'd say last year, like radical decentralization, which is still like a big ideology. Yeah. Probably the most like radical ideology of the space. But I think, I mean, obviously they're two opposing ethoses, right? They're two opposing missions. And I think somewhere in the middle is where the sweet spot is. I mean, I've had this conversation a lot of times around like curation. Like, how can you curate in a decentralized world where the market and the community is supposed to decide everything?
Totally.
And I do think that just as humans, you know, we need to be led. We're kind of like herd animals in many ways, and because so many people are so busy, it's very difficult to, like, if you're not spending all day on Twitter to understand where the needle's moving, it's difficult to know what to buy, and then it becomes incredibly overwhelming. Like if you jump onto OpenSea or Foundation or you know any of the big marketplaces, really,
they're literally an ocean. I mean, it's correctly named for that reason, right?
Yeah, it's so overwhelming. And if you're a collector looking to like get in for the first time, you're just like, well, where do I start here?
Totally.
They're also very new aesthetics, so it's not like you can lean on what you already know or the principles that you've learned from the traditional collecting world. It's a very new experience. So I think, there needs to be some form of centralization.
Right.
I know I'll probably get lambasted for saying that at a conference like this, but I think there will naturally be leaders or curators or experts in any field, which the mass will kind of look to direct them in terms of what to buy.
Sure.
And I think right now, I think it's like it's the collectors. I think we're seeing this massive shift on like traditional collectors, which was like the leisure class, right, who have inherited their money, who have time to like wander around galleries in Chelsea or in Mayfair on the weekends.
They know the language, their muscles are sort of already well versed. And I mean, that's sort of the existential question I wanted us to ask ourselves this morning, which is why do we exist as these sort of curated platforms in a DeFi space? And I think to some degree, Joe, you touched on that, which is because it's context providing. And it's helping sort of slice and dice what is otherwise a huge world where it requires a lot of time, it maybe requires a level of expertise. Nadia, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Why are we here in this Web3 world?
So no, but on a global scale, of course, we are here because I think it's our human nature being not satisfied with the current state or the present. So we always like look for develop something that the brighter future. And as Joe said, of course, like I remember in 2019, in 2018, this community of creators was pretty small, and it was a community when the collectors knew the artists and they directly bought from the artists, and it was like sort of like anarchy movement when artists, it was even the slogan, no middleman.
Right.
So no middleman, no galleries, no curators, because we just create and we have direct access to the collectors. And it was very good. It was very good market to interrupt the art market,
right? Absolutely.
Not the traditional art market. But then, of course, when so many artists, good artists, bad artists, I don't know, any kind of artists invaded the space, the collectors that bought a lot initially, they got lost. Right. They got like, I don't know whom I should collect.
Sure. Because
before I knew, I built this personal connection, and now I'm like swimming in an ocean.
Right.
And for us, the same. We worked with a certain like small group of collectors, and now with our recent project that we developed, OG Crystals, that was launched last October, and we built the community of 60,000 people, and like 10,000 people came, probably in a week.
Right.
Because we announced the project, we didn't know even how many collectibles, how many artworks we are planning to make.
Right.
And we thought probably, okay, 1,500, 3,000, 2,000. But then when the community started to grow on Discord, they got excited about dynamic, generative nature, people probably not familiar with this project. I need to say something. So we developed the project that's called OG Crystals, and this is it's the first dynamic generative NFT collection of 10,301 artworks, crystals. So practically people buy the seed, and then when it comes to your crypto wallet, it reads your data, and the first part of the crystal is developed. And then you need to sell it to another crypto wallet. It reads the data there, and another part of
so
crypto
it
wallet.
lives and breathes.
So it lives and breathes, and it represents the commune ownership. And finally, it can be
Right.
the final piece that related to algorithms and your identity.
Right.
It's
Which is so different than I think how collecting has been historically, which is you buy something, it sort of sits in your collection, and
No, this
right,
is-
and rarity back, or even then, it's like, oh, it's fresh to the auction market, but all of a sudden, I think the metrics we're using to decide rareability, the provenance, have completely changed, and I just want to pivot,
exactly, and
right?
this is the exciting part, that
Right.
all those like 6,900 wallets that were participating in this project and 33,000 transactions that this community did
Right.
for this crystal
Right.
crystals.
Check out Nadia's shirt after
Check
the
my
chat.
t-shirt, yes.
I do wanna pivot just for
become
1 second.
co-creators.
Right.
They all become co-creators.
Exactly. So this idea of like community co-creating, co-curating. Greg at MakersPlace is working
And
on sort
it's
of a
so
community curation program. And maybe, Greg, you can explain a little bit about what that is, how that works, and what you're seeing as a result from that project.
Yeah. So MakersPlace is an invite-only platform. We're not totally open, and it just kind of came onto us all at once. Maybe 6 months ago, the team was like, there's too few people making the decisions for who's coming onto the platform. We were thinking internally, the community was saying the same thing, and kind of to your point, Joe, like finding the balance between a centralized and decentralized platform. We generated a curator program, like a community curator program. So we have almost 75 different artists, collectors, traditional fine art gallerists who help decide who comes onto the platform. And it's honestly one of my favorite things. I currently manage it, and yeah, it's really cool to learn about like all these little pockets and categories of interests that have an application to digital ownership that I never knew even existed or was possible, the overlap. So all of this diversity in terms of thinking and medium and like who is making the decisions is really refreshing day to day.
Totally.
And it's super interesting to think about building a product around that too.
Sure.
And thinking about like royalty systems, like curator royalties. Like if you bring someone on who becomes the next, X copy was selling pieces for like $100 a couple of years ago. But if you're the curator tied to that name, and that's super meaningful. So yeah, just interesting to think about.
How do you decide who gets to enter that board or that committee?
I mean, at this point, it's really just like scotch tape and sticks. At this point, the program is super small, so it's kind of like its own little referral network too. We're not like actively seeking out curators yet. I think I'm ready and excited to scale the program and see what that looks like. But at this point, yeah, it's just a combination of long time artists on the platform who are, it's interesting, artists are by far the best performing curators that we have. The top 3 curators in terms of who they refer and their referral sales are all artists. So you really like get to see like who has the tap into the community. But then we also have like amazing collectors and some very well-known people in the space.
Right. That's so interesting, too, to sort of see artists wearing these hats that otherwise they would not wear in the traditional space. I mean, there's a real reliance on this network of advisors and gallerists and, you're the people that sort of help you facilitate the many parts of your business, and you really just are the creator. But I think we are seeing this shift to the artist who's managing their own program and their own book of business and their own market. And one thing that we haven't talked about was sort of, in this space, we're seeing and community curation and creation, but also on the buy side, we're seeing that as well. So, I mean, DAOs, they're important, and they're completely profoundly new to an art market where, you're still dealing with KYC, AML, one-on-one buyership or proof of funds. I mean, very sort of an onerous task to get a buyer onboarded. And now all of a sudden, look at Constitution DAO at Sotheby's, right? And I think it's important for us to bring them into the fold. They're critical, but also to build out operations in a way that are meaningful to them. So like at Artnet, I can say we put together a program for DAOs who are buying. And, it can be, it takes a little bit of paperwork. I mean, you can do it based on like ownership percentage. You just have to get anyone who owns 10% or more, and that's a smaller pool than having to attempt to do KYC AML for all of the DAO participants in a world that is decidedly anti-KYC AML anyway. I mean, are you guys dealing with DAOs? Are they in your buyer base? Are you networking with them? What's your relationship like on the buy side?
Yeah, in terms of collectors and like some of the volume on MakersPlace, definitely coming from DAOs.
Sure.
I think it's something we want to and need to explore more, but not tremendously right now for us currently.
Right. And what about you, Nadia? Are you seeing DAOs on your platform?
Yes, it has been for a while. We have this idea to develop DAO around the platform, but with this OG Crystal project, we're now actually building based on this mechanics of dynamic generative artworks, NFTs. We are building the platform. Curated platform
right.
that also other projects can be developed with this mechanics using the same principles and algorithms. And there is a DAO formed around the project because it's a community of 3,500 owners of the crystals that we have to keep excited about the project. So it's not as in art world, when
right.
you sell the artwork and you forget.
Right, the transaction's done.
You forgotten, like
right.
the transaction's done, like till the next
right.
sale. Here, the collection, you are responsible for this collection to live and breathe
exactly.
in the long term.
Right.
So we have a long-term strategy that involves to build a DAO around the community, and we are like dealing with this right now.
Right.
But also interesting thing that we are building the sculpture out of those 10,301 crystal that will be exhibited at the museum, and this is a very interesting. Let's say when we say bridging between
right.
traditional
and it's also
and
sort of
crypto,
coming full circle where all of a sudden, right, you're having physical exhibitions for these digital assets. And
yeah, and I don't know still how we're bridging, because who helps to build this bridge in
right.
many terms, like in legal point and how community management. So we have Hirschhorn Museum that would like to acquire one of the crystals of like Michael G.
right.
and Daniel Krivoruchka artwork. And we are dealing with that the museum, to buying that piece,
right.
that museum will become a part of DAO.
Exactly. So we're seeing these really traditional institutions.
Is a traditional institution
right.
and centralized institution.
Right.
So how this works for them in terms of like from
exactly.
the legal perspective.
Exactly.
So we are developing this.
Totally.
We don't know. We are
right.
in explorers.
I know. I mean, a lot of what we're doing is precedent setting, and we're putting sort of the legal, the operational parameters in place as we build it. I do want to be mindful of time. We only have a couple of minutes left. Maybe if we can just crystal ball for a moment before kicking the mic to the audience for questions. But what should we be on the lookout for as our industry grapples with this idea of NFTs, the tokenization of the world? I mean, what I'm particularly interested in my part of the business is also just I think we're at the surface of what an NFT actually is and can do. I'm really interested about the implications in terms of authenticity, provenance. I think that that's something that, from an operations perspective, we have only started to scratch the surface on. But Joe, what should we be on the lookout for in the next 12 months? Because certainly the previous 12 months were formative, to say the least.
Yeah, I mean, the space moves so fast, right? So, like a week in the space is like a year in the more traditional
totally.
world. For me, like I think it's the artists who are using code to inform their practice.
Right.
Artists using data and code, because we've seen like this. The traditional art market has been traditional media, painting, sculpture. Again, it's like functionless work.
Sure.
And I think there's artists out there who are using code as a visual language now.
Right.
It's a computer language. It's a language in the same way that French or German or Spanish is, and in many ways, art is a language as well. It's a form of expression. And I think as we move into just a more digital world, it's the artists that are using code that are going to be the artists of the future, and I genuinely believe that. And not to say that traditional artists are just going to sort of like die out,
right.
But they'll coexist peacefully. And I think digital artists who are basically building algorithms and building code to develop sort of conditional relationships with their owners, to build
right.
communities around them as an artist or as a brand. I think we're kind of moving into this era of sort of, I don't want to say like the rise of the nerds, but it's kind of like basically bringing programmers into being contextualized as artists for the first time, as opposed to being kind of like goal or like product oriented practices. I think like coding is going to become a much more creative pursuit. And also, you know, I mean, the fine art market of NFTs is just a tiny, tiny part of like NFTs utility. I mean, it's like it's the tiniest like cap on the end, really. So for us, it's all about articulating and trying to define like what quality means in the NFT space, like what is important art. And I do believe like over the next couple of decades, it's going to be the generative artists who are using code.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think you're right. We're in a new epic of art history, and to be some of the writers of that, and I think to see the work that's being created is really, it's a gift, and who knows where it will take us. But I do want to kick it to the audience. Do we have any questions this morning? Go ahead.
Well, in the interest of transparency, which is a big thing in the space, so in the gallery world, the general artist gallery split is 50-50. And, you know, like a lot of the NFT artists who are successful, let's say last year when there was a kind of a big boom in the art space, it was all this kind of like anti-gallery, anti-like intermediary sort of narrative. And that's like, oh, I shouldn't be giving away 50% to galleries. And I actually think, you know, when we started our gallery, I was also shocked when I learned it was like a 50-50 split, because I was like, well, you know, an artist makes work and they should really take home the earnings of that work. But then, you know, having run a gallery for like nearly 10 years now, you realize the amount of work that goes into running a gallery, you know, the overheads, the costs, and also the galleries that do it well really earn that 50%. And often don't end up with a lot of like money to spare, right? So galleries are having to kind of redefine their models now to serve this new world. In the NFT space, I think it's a kind of sliding scale, but it's generally around like 80% to the artist and let's say 20% to the platform, and it can be even more and even less than that. But it's generally much more heavily skewed towards the artist, and it's this concept, which I think is, again, it's like a radical concept or a radical ideology right now, which is being pulled back a little bit as you're seeing NFT artists moving away from just doing a drop on a platform to actually the platform providing a physical space for an exhibition, or a platform providing like a customized, like dynamic, generative type of drop. So I think the more the platforms, galleries, or like intermediaries put into a drop, the more they can command in terms of percentage share, and the more I think artists
Exactly, and I mean, there's also, you can kick it to the buy side, right? I mean, so, you know, at Artnet, we have a buyer's premium for our traditional business, and we reduced it to 10% for our buyers who buy NFTs on our platform. And I think that's important too, because we want our creators and the consigners, if they are secondary market or existing NFTs, to take the lion's share. And, you know, really, other than building sort of that infrastructure at the beginning, it doesn't cost much to list these things. I mean, that's, again, no shipping, no catalog deadlines, none of these sort of brick and mortar accoutrement we're all used to on that side. It's just a lower overhead operation. And I think likewise, why do you pay a buyer's premium or something on top of it? It's because it is the curation. I mean, we're making it easy. We're getting you access to that premium, to that rare asset, which otherwise, you know, you have to wade through OpenSea or make your own connection. So I do think that, you know, it's sort of a more direct to consumer model. Thanks for the question. Any other questions? Okay, well, with that, thank you guys all so much for rallying with us at the 9 a.m. We really appreciate it. We'll hang around for a bit if anyone wants to come up and chat, and enjoy the rest of day 2. Thanks so much, guys.